Buenos días. Vamos a comenzar. Este va a ser el tutorial del día de hoy. Si están ustedes buscando el tutorial de IPv6, no es en este salón. Entonces, si están buscando IPv6, no es aquí. Entonces, es tiempo todavía de moverse. El taller de hoy va a ser DNSSEC.
I hadn't started saying anything specific. Well, this is the workshop on DNSSEC. We have a very important person today here. We have Olaf Coleman. Olaf is a director of NL Net Labs, and it's always kind of difficult to pronounce this for me. It is very important because they have worked with open source, DNS open source, NSD, and outbound, and therefore this is the best person to deliver this workshop on this topic because he comes from a company that develops this kind of software. When we are also very happy because Olaf was a chair of the IAB, Internet Architectural Board, and those are the ones who see the need of the Internet to work with a higher scope. And he continues being a member of IAB, and therefore, for all these reasons, we're very happy to be here with him. And I think it's going to be a very interesting tutorial, and therefore, I give you a laugh, and thanks a lot for being here.
Hello. Good, I'm audible. First, I'm going to ask you a question, and that is a question that needs a little bit of rearrangement. I am going to talk the whole day, and we are going to be a little team, and we need some interaction. And that works best if you're all in front. So please, if you're in the back, come to the front, sit on the tables before me. Just make it a little bit more close. Otherwise, I have the feeling that I have to shout to you, and that doesn't work. So please, all come to the front. Let's fill up the chairs in the rows in the front. Please. You two on the back, please stand up and get to the front. First line, just come to the front. Yeah, well, it makes it more intimate because it's a whole day thing today. I'm going to try and explain you a little bit of the context of DNS and why you would need DNSSEC. We're going to talk about how to integrate this into your network, what the hands-on things are that you need to do. So there's a lot of talking and very little doing today. This course has been developed around doing it yourself as well, so there are elements of that, but today we're only going to do the talking. One important thing is that if you have questions, feel free to interrupt. It will be light. Feel free to interrupt.
Siéntese libres de interactuar.
Por favor, fique à vontade para interagir em qualquer pergunta. Eu estou aqui. Eu não sou docente profissional. As explicações talvez
não estão sincronizadas perfeitamente
com as compreensões. Então.
Bueno, vamos a hablar hasta la 1,
falar até a 1 com 30 minutos para intervalo para cafezinho, e depois vamos ter o almoço e depois vamos continuar durante a tarde.
Vamos a cubrir bastante material.
Muito material.
E se me siguen,
e se vocês me acompanharem,
esta URL tiene todo el material
possui todo o material
del día. Este sitio tal vez no está permanente.
Website talvez não esteja
todo
permanente.
El material está
todo
ahí.
o material está
y para los
ahí.
alumnos que se van a quedar hasta el final,
que vão ficar até o final,
traje como 20 USBs con todo el material cargado
com pendrives, com material todo carregado.
Los pueden pedir al final.
De todo o material e vocês podem pedir no final.
Para los que se
especialmente para quem ficar até o final.
Una remera, una camiseta que entreguemos.
Digamos brinde de entrega para vocês.
Eu sou o diretor,
sou o diretor então do
Almen Labs, uma organização de caridade,
é uma organização reconhecida pelas autoridades de charity.
E estamos autorizados para trabalhar em open source e com estándares abertos.
E com padrões abertos.
Sobrevivimos en lo que es la internet abierta y con
sobrevivimos
todo su contexto.
O que tem a ver com a internet aberta, down.
Mantenemos todos estos
mantemos todos esses programas.
Y lo que vamos a hacer acá
aqui
es parte de lo que yo llamo
parte do que eu chamo de engenharia.
Básicamente,
más o menos
hacerles saber lo básico que necesitan sobre
a parte básica que gostaria que você soubesse sobre a internet e para passar a um nível superior. Eu costumava antes eu trabalhava, mas no começo de 2000, 2001
era responsável
isso já há muito tempo, era responsável
de llevar a cabo
para a implementação DNSSEC,
el RCC
e o RCC,
me involucrei muito
e eu me envolvi
DNSSEC e na engenharia.
DNSSEC e com engenharia. Também foram as extensões do DNSSEC em 2001 e 2006 que também participei e no IAB.
Creio que não vamos
ver os nomes neste momento, mas eu gostaria que vocês levantassem o braço. Gostaria de ver qual é a experiência de vocês nesta área. Se eu disser Unix, prompt,
por favor,
o que? Levantem um braço. Quem tem experiência nisso? Sim, eu sabia que você tinha experiência nisso. Se eu made,
¿Qué piensan de esto?
O que vocês pensam sobre isso? Vocês acham
made news,
fazer notícias, divulgar? Levantem o braço.
Estamos em um nível
num nível no qual
estou já um pouquinho nervioso.
Eu estou ficando um pouco nervoso. Vamos ver.
Name.
Se
vocês pensam que
se vocês acham que name é para uma junta, name operador de outro servidor, por favor, levantem o braço. Então, estamos numa etapa que eu já me dei conta que todo mundo que está aqui na sala já trabalharam com named ou parent. Alguém já tenha trabalhado com named? Não, duas pessoas? Você? Não pode ser.
Bueno, vino num paquete.
Bom, então vem num pacote.
Se alguém lo usou.
Se alguém já utilizou.
Bem. Bueno, vou seguir sem isto.
Vou continuar sem isto.
Então, são domínios
que vocês reconhecem, que já estão acostumados.
Tem um
objetivo para o dia de hoje. Eu enviei um tweet ontem, quando vi que havia um número significativo de pessoas que estavam inscritos para esse seminário, que para no final desse dia, pelo menos 2/3 de vocês iam ter uma validação quando chegasse à sua casa, iam poder trabalhar com este tipo de sistemas. Isso significa, vamos ver o que significa isso mais adiante. Esse é o meu objetivo para esta sessão de hoje. Eu gostaria que vocês escrevessem numa folha de papel qual é o objetivo de vocês para o dia de hoje. Por favor, numa folha de papel. O que vocês querem conseguir no dia de hoje? Porque no final do dia, se tivermos tempo, eu vou escolher algumas pessoas de uma forma aleatória que possam rever o que queriam para o dia de hoje como objetivo, e eu vou perguntar se conseguiram atingir esse objetivo. Se não, qual a experiência durante o dia? Então, vocês vieram aqui, estão aqui com um propósito específico, e eu gostaria de saber, para poder avaliar no final do dia, ou pelo menos que vocês possam avaliar se vocês atingiram esse objetivo e se realmente foi um dia frutífero.
Bueno, cambiamos de lugar las pantallas.
Então, passemos agora a essa tela.
Por favor, escrevam então o que vocês gostariam de conseguir na sessão de hoje. Como vocês podem ver, é um curso que vai durar 2 dias. E isto é justamente sobre o que vamos falar hoje. Talvez vamos pular parte desse material. Vamos ver isso mais tarde. Vamos começar com DNS e suas debilidades, seus pontos fracos, e vamos trabalhar também com Bound em prática, que talvez pulemos. Unbound é um programa muito interessante. Eu recomendo que vocês trabalhem com esse programa. Não estamos tratando de impor uma marca, não é para impor uma tecnologia. E não estamos promovendo também nenhum tipo de uma tecnologia IC. Eu vou pular isso. DNSSEC, na teoria, é o que vamos trabalhar hoje, que vai ser o nosso foco. Isso é o que vamos pular. Mas depois da parte teórica, talvez isso vai estar. Vamos tratar, vamos trabalhar hoje à tarde, são as chaves de o DNS Keys, e vamos trabalhar com o workflow do DNSSEC. Talvez quando vocês forem daqui, talvez vocês vão querer implementar o DNSSEC, e eu quero falar também sobre uma tecnologia específica, porque não há uma alternativa para isso. Esse é Open DNSSEC. Isso também vocês vão ver dentro de um contexto mais adiante. E também talvez vamos pular esta parte, porque temos pouco tempo para poder ver isso em apenas um dia. Bom, vocês estão rindo talvez agora, mas vão ver que no final do dia vocês vão estar cansados, depois de toda essa jornada de trabalho. Alguma pergunta que gostariam de formular? Creio que não.
Não, eu acho que não.
Podemos verlo em japonês.
Podemos ver, digamos, em japonês.
Quero dizer-lhes, George me
perguntou, podemos ministrar esse curso em japonês? Eu quero dizer, então, temos um grupo uma equipe de intérprete que vão trabalhar muito mais do que hoje, porque tem que estar traduzindo tudo isso que eu estou dizendo. Antes de começarmos, obrigado às intérpretes, porque quem vai ter que fazer, eles certamente vão fazer um trabalho muito bom. Me disseram que os intérpretes são muito bons amigos e são fundamentais nesse tipo de curso, e serão os amigos de vocês, então.
As vulnerabilidades e o DNS.
As vulnerabilidades e os DNS. Isto é o que nós vamos cobrir hoje. Amanhã, na sessão geral, eu vou proporcionar a vocês
discurso que está relacionado com isto.
Um discurso que está relacionado com isso. Muitas das coisas que vamos ver hoje, vamos ver amanhã com diferentes estruturas.
Me puseram um escaloncito.
Bom, me colocaram aqui um degrau, eu fico um pouquinho mais alto e posso ver posso ver todo mundo daqui. Que é um DNS? DNS é o sistema de nomes de domínio, como todos vocês já sabem.
Nos brinda
e nos fornece um mapeamento dos nomes para os recursos. Os recursos mais conhecidos são os endereços. Se temos um nome e queremos chegar até um servidor específico, há um endereço que precisamos. Então, vamos até o DNS e pedimos um mapeamento entre o nome que temos, por exemplo, www.com, por exemplo, até o endereço que estamos interessados, que poderia ser um endereço IPv4 ou
uma direção
um endereço IPv6. Mas há outros recursos também que estão no DNS, os nomes, as prioridades, de troca de correios que precisamos, por exemplo, para um domínio específico também. Há os registros de servidores que possuem, que procuram determinados servidores. Não é utilizado unicamente para mapeamento de endereços, há um conjunto de recursos que precisamos para realizar negócios na internet. Essencialmente, sempre precisamos de um DNS quando estamos trabalhando na internet. É uma dessas estruturas centrais e é global, está distribuído e é um sistema coerentemente
flexível. E eu vou explicar isso em mais detalhes. Como eu já lhes disse, quase todas as transações via internet utilizam o DNS. O DNS tem uma natureza bem distribuída. E a razão pela qual é tão bem sucedida foi desenhado no momento no qual o tamanho da internet total era menos de 1 milhão de hosts. Estamos já utilizando mais de 1 bilhão de hosts. É muito bem sucedido, é um sucesso, muito mais do que as pessoas imaginaram no momento de desenhá-lo e a forma mediante o qual funciona e porque tem essa natureza distribuída. Há um grupo de servidores autoritativos que proporcionam o espaço do nome. O nome, por exemplo, www.com, que é dividido em vários tipos de domínios. E já vamos falar mais sobre essa questão mais adiante.
E estes servidores têm parte do conhecimento de ese espacio de nombres, o
namespace.
Pueden referirlos
a outros servidores de nomes e desta forma
construyen un sistema jerárquico.
Construímos um sistema hierárquico. Do ponto de vista do cliente, temos um servidor recursivo. Os servidores recursivos são utilizados pelos dispositivos e os aplicativos. Nesse computador temos por exemplo, um stock resolver que vai fazer uma consulta até o servidor local e formula essa pergunta e vão poder responder de um cache e vão fazer a escalabilidade do sistema em sua totalidade. A terminologia que vão utilizar aqui é a seguinte: que mantém uma cópia da autoridade dos dados, é Recursive Name Server, que são os que entram em contato com os servidores de autoritativos para compilar os staff resolvers que formulam a pergunta
que se dispara desde la aplicación. Entonces, estos staff resolvers están en su sistema, siempre están, por ejemplo, en el iPhone, y formulan, es un componente, y formulan una pregunta para que se obtenga una respuesta. Y estos recursive name servers van a los authoritative name servers para obtener esa respuesta. Como me gustan los dibujitos animados, bueno, este es como una animación de lo que realmente sucede. En esta esquina podemos ver el dispositivo. Y cuando nosotros necesitamos formular una pregunta, dispara una pregunta el dispositivo hacia el recursive server. Entonces, el recursive server la va a buscar
vai buscar
y partes de la respuesta en los distintos authoritative servers que están en todo el mundo. Entonces aquí tenemos nuestra red local con los dispositivos, tenemos el recursive name server que es un componente de la red aquí y disparan las preguntas hacia los authoritative name servers.
Os servidores autoritativos.
Bueno, utilizamos el DNS cada vez que necesitamos saber dónde está otra persona o
localizada otra pessoa.
Cuando necesitamos hacer negocios.
Cuando precisamos
DNS,
também fazer negócios.
Como yo le expliqué a mi mamá,
expliquei a minha mãe,
la guía telefónica de
como um guia, é uma guia telefônica da internet.
Es bastante correcto.
E está bem, é correto
porque
isso.
Está compuesto, es un libro para una ciudad. Cualquier authoritative server es como una guía para la ciudad. Tiene un montón de teléfonos, tiene los códigos, uno si vive en la guía tiene los teléfonos.
Como guía,
y aquí tenemos todos los teléfonos de otros
países también.
Y realmente esto tiene sentido.
Isso faz sentido.
Entonces, como mi mamá usa Skype, le puedo explicar que el DNS se utiliza también con el Voice over
IP.
¿Cómo funciona esto? Si utilizamos
Well, let's have a look in detail. There's this little guy here. His name is Bird, and he has got this IP phone here, and he wants to make a call. What happens is that he establishes a connection. He says to the server, please call a specific number. The SIP server will then look up that specific number in the reverse, in the E164.ARPAC tree. This is voice over IP SIP protocol. Yeah? This is used whenever you do voice over IP, and this lookup might be a little bit different, but in essence, this is what is happening. That recursive name server then goes out to the internet and does its lookup. And at some point, it will have an answer and return that answer with the location of the destination server to that SIP server down there. Now that SIP server knows where that SIP server knows where to go for the call negotiation. It goes to another SIP server and says, I want to make this call. That other SIP server will look up another phone somewhere on the internet and says, that's where you want to go, and you establish it. This is how the DNS is a central part, an essential and central part to making voice over IP calls. And I'm consciously using voice over IP and not web serving, because the DNS is not only for web serving. The internet is more than only web. The internet is mail, is voice, is services, is a whole bunch of other stuff. So you use it when sending mail. The picture is exactly the same. You send your mail to an outgoing SMTP server. The outgoing SMTP server does a lookup against the recursive name server and will find the destination of the mail server, of the receiving mail server. And from that point, the mail will be sent. Or you use it when browsing the web. Very simple. My machine asks the recursive local name server, where can I find this web page? The recursive name server will say, you can find it on that server, and my machine can connect to the web server. So you use the DNS when doing software upgrades, sharing your agenda, uploading text form, instant messaging with your friend, connect to your security camera, and figure out what the latest news is of a merger. Everything that you do on the internet, everything with value, uses the DNS. And there's already valuable stuff here. DNS is important. So how would an attacker use the DNS for an attack? In essence, it's about fooling where the real service is. If I want to have a service which involves money or interaction or communication, I ask the DNS, where can I get this service? And the DNS will say, you can find that service there. Now, if I'm an attacker and I'm sitting here and I want you to connect to me, I can make the DNS server say, you have to go to me instead of there. Then I can hijack that service. Yeah? Back to that VoIP example we just had. Yeah? So same picture. And what would happen if an attacker could successfully introduce a fake answer in this picture? Let's see what happens then. So we introduce a hacker on the network. Lives there, hacker inside. Famous Intel logo, hacker inside. And the call setup is exactly the same. Bert asks, I want to set up a call, the lookup is performed, and now what happens is that the recursive DNS server will go out to the internet, and the attacker will try to get in the middle. It will fire off fake answers. And as soon as the fake answer gets there before the real answer, this guy is in business. And he can say the location of the destination server is not that SIP server here on the left side, but it is the guy himself, it's the hacker. So now, this recursive name server thinks, or this SIP server thinks, that if you want to do a call, that call needs to go to not to here, but to here. So the connection is established. Negotiation and call setup. And what this hacker, of course, does, he listens in. And he does terminate the call to the original phone, but he sits in the middle and can listen into your conversations. Very simple. There he goes, listening in. The attack that I just showed you is called cache poisoning. Cache poisoning means that you get a fake answer into a cache, which is not, coherent with where your customer wants to go. It's the basis of it is inserting false data in the cache of the recursive name server. That's not a new attack, actually. In the early 80s, I believe it was, Steve Bellevin already described this in the Usenix paper. And it was one of the reasons, and the story was that he actually withheld from publishing this paper because he was so scared that this would be abused and misused. But it was one of the reasons why people started working on DNSSEC in the end of the 80s, I believe that was, beginning of the 90s. We've been working on DNSSEC for a very long time, and I wasn't there at the beginning. But cache poisoning was the original inspiration for DNSSEC. So let's see. Let's have a look at the DNSSEC architecture and protocol. And again, we're going to go back to this little picture here, but we're going to zoom in a little bit more on what happens here. And this is a picture that people who've worked with DNS probably have seen before. But what happens is that the DNS has a namespace. www.google.com is the name, and that name is chopped up into pieces. Here I take the example of nlnetlabs.nl. How that is chopped up in pieces. And a recursive name server will go to authoritative name servers that each have a piece of that name structure in their collective memory, so to speak. And the recursive name server will try to do its best to compile the answer. So stop resolver goes out and asks a question, www.nlnetlabs, I want an address record for that. Now the recursive name server, assuming it knows nothing, will look into an internal table and says, where can I find the root of the namespace? And the root of the namespace is a bunch of name servers that's stored in a file called root hints. And this is where that name server will go and ask, please, can you tell me if you have an answer to www.nlnetlabs.nl? And that root server says, I don't have an answer, but I do know where the servers are that know everything about NL. You have to go there. That's called a referral. I don't know nothing, you go there. Now the root zone is a zone that has all these TLDs in it. You probably have heard about TLDs, top-level domains, generic top-level domains, country-level top-level domains. So the root service knows about the location of all those TLDs. They know where the servers are for Argentina, for Chile, for all those top-level domains, and they know where the NL service is. So the recursive name server remembers this actually, where the NL servers are to be found, and will ask the NL service, where can I find www.nlnetlabs.nl? At which point the NL service says, we cannot remember everything about all the locations of the servers of everything under NL. No, we've delegated the responsibility for maintaining the NLNet namespace to NLNet itself, and its servers, its name servers, can be found elsewhere. So it will give a referral back to the name service of NLNet. At which point the recursive name server will go to www.nlnetlabs.nl, ask that question to the nlnetlabs name servers, and get an authoritative answer. Those servers will say, we know you have to go to that address if you want to go to www.nlnetlabs. And all these things are put in the cache. They are remembered. So the next time somebody asks for www.nlnetlabs to this recursive name server, they don't have to go out. This machine doesn't have to do this lookup again. Yeah? Now, just for numbers, Root servers, there are 13 names. Root servers go by 13 names. There are actually, I don't know the current number, but well over 150 servers that serve the root. And they're distributed using, you can find them using routing tricks. I would say that if you look at the authoritative side of this thing, I don't know if there are numbers of authoritative name servers, but you should think that those numbers are in the 100,000s to 1 million authoritative name servers. Recursive name servers, there are many more, probably in the 100 millions. Yeah? So this to give you an idea. Recursive name servers can actually run not only in the network infrastructure, but also, for instance, on your laptop. I have a setup that runs a recursive name server on my laptop. A popular tool to do troubleshooting. Who of you has used DIG? Raise of hands. Who have used DIG? D-I-G. A bunch of people. This is a troubleshooting tool for DNS. And what you see here is basically the output of a question. This is a question to a root server. It asks for www.nlnetlabs, and what you see here is that you don't get an answer, but it says the authority for .nl is elsewhere. It's on these servers. And these servers have those addresses. This is a typical referral message. And I won't bother you at this moment with the details of what is in those packets. The question is there. You can see it's a referral. There's no answer, but there is a bunch of authorities answers here, and that basically say go elsewhere. You can see that by having the authority section and having NS resource records here. Now, let's have a little bit of a detailed look here. Recursive name server cache material. They remember something for when a client comes the next time. And authoritative name servers can say, please cache this for a number of seconds because we expect this to be stable over a certain period of time and only then come back. That's called the TTL. If you look at the previous page, you can see that the TTL value is living in your answer. This is for when you use the troubleshooting tools. I have to go through all the animation again. Apologies for that. And the TTL parameter basically determines how long a cache might hold on to its data. Yeah. It's set by the zone owners, and the TTL is a second counter, and it will decrease when it lives in the cache. And at some point, it will expire, and the recursive name server will go back and ask the question. Yeah. Oh. So back to cache poisoning. What does it mean? Cache poisoning is an... I'm zooming into cache poisoning as a specific attack. It's an attack that is based on predicting properties. One of the security mechanisms that recursive name servers have built in order to defend themselves from cache poisoning is to understand what kind of question they ask and what kind of answer they expect. It's more or less the same thing like when I ask a question to a group of people about something that, for instance, I expect a female voice to answer. In this crowd, the chances of a female voice answering me are about 1 in 10 if we're lucky. Yeah? But those are chances and odds. So it's much more difficult to give a false answer if I ask, where's the coffee? And I close my eyes and a female voice says the coffee is down in the lobby. I will probably trust that voice, but I close myself off for all the male voices saying the coffee is in the swimming pool. So that's a protective mechanism. I know what kind of answer I'm expecting. What are those mechanisms? Well, one of the mechanisms is if I send out a question, I put a query ID in the field. It's just a number. And I expect that the answer that comes back has exactly the same number. So a server that will give the answer will just copy that field. An attacker that tries to inject an answer from the outside needs to guess that ID value. So they essentially need to guess whether I, as a server, asked a female for an answer or a male for an answer. Yeah? Another thing that needs to match is, of course, the question. So an answer will always contain a copy of the question and a copy of the query ID. So an attacker will have to, when an attacker tries to do an attack from the outside and just sends answers to a recursive name server in order to get there first, so to speak, they will have to mimic these properties, the ID value and this that little thing, the question. So what you try to do in order to protect yourself against cache poisoning as a recursive name server is to vary as many properties as you can. You try to vary the query ID, make it truly random, so that an attacker will not know and is not able to predict what the next query ID is once they've seen one. And also on transport level, so the TCP, not the TCP session, the UDP session, you try to put variations. So not only do you send a question out to a female, you also say you have to answer me in a Spanish accent, otherwise I won't believe you. Or you have to answer me in a Dutch accent, otherwise you don't believe me. So in order for the attack to work, an attacker would have to impersonate a Spanish person to do the trick. I'm afraid I'm losing you. Now people say, well, why isn't that query ID? You've got 16 bits around. Why isn't that sufficient? Well, that has to do with the birthday paradox. Birthday paradox basically says if you have a bunch of people in a room, the odds are very high that there are at least 2 persons with the same birthday. And those properties are exploited, so to speak, when you only look at the query ID. You need to have as much variation as possible. So protections about query attack, I have the feeling I'm losing a lot of people here, but protection against against cache poisoning by an attacker that's bombarding your servers with fake answers is by varying as many properties as you can. Yeah? Now this is a slide from way back, and this is about shortly after Kaminsky made his attack, cache poisoning attack clear. What he basically looked at is ID variation and port number variation, and found that it was very easy a couple of years back to do cache poisoning. An unpatched server here is a server from way back that didn't have good randomization, and a server that would an attacker that would have fairly clear access to the network and could fire off packets all the time would have successful cache poisoning within 10 seconds. If the odds to get a cache poison 50% by 50% chance would be happen within 10 seconds, which is fairly quick. If an attacker decides they want to own a certain attack, it would then take them 10 seconds in order to be successful. Well, people did a lot of work to see if they could improve the limit, the barrier for intrusion. Because this attacker needed to send out queries, shitloads of them. You would see that on the network. So the idea was that if you do that, then you could have some intrusion detection, seeing the amount of packets coming in. Well, so in order to do more variation, people started to use the query ports, more variation put in. So the originating port from which you send out a query needed to be matched as well. If you look at the packet, UDP packet, it has a source address, a source port, a destination address, and a destination port. Destination address and destination port are fixed, port 53 for DNS traffic, but the source port is something that you can muck around with. You don't have to take the same source port all the time. So an attacker would need to match the source port and in order to be successful. So you have more variation there. So what people started to do when Kaminsky made his announcement is actually that they patched their servers. Some implementations said, we can only use 1024 ports, so we don't do full randomization. Well, that improved the situation a little bit. It would take 2.8 hours for an attacker to be successful. Unbound, with all its defaults on, it would take 28 days. The amount of bits of randomness that you could have are shown here, from 16 to 34. And then with a bunch of other non-standard tricks, you can actually reach, improve the chances or decrease the chance that your cache is poisoned to 28,000 days. That might sound reasonable, and it probably is in lots of days. So without DNSSEC and a good implementation, the chances of cache poisoning are low. Under the assumption that you do some intrusion detection, of course. But is it really low? How about attackers? Do they care? They don't care that they hit you. They care that they hit somebody. So they go out on the internet and they try a gazillion hosts and they keep on trying and they keep on trying. And at some point, it's your bank account. Randomness is not trivial. I think that most implementations today do a fair job. This has been on the news and people know about this. I'm going to skip this, but there were points where randomness was really tricky. You know? So you have a lot of things to vary about, but if you don't do that randomly, and the attacker can predict those properties, nothing happens. Using ports, not an easy task. Some architectures don't allow it. You know, the 1024 was there for a reason. Now, even though, you know, all this randomness and everything and this intrusion detection stuff, you know, people didn't really care about cache poisoning. Because people figured, you know, an attacker needs to get there before me, and the odds that the attacker gets there is fairly low, and as the real answer comes in, we're saved by the TTL. The attacker has to wait for at least a week to try again, and then, you know, they've got maybe 1 or 2 shots at my recursive name server, and then they have to wait for another week. So the TTL actually saves us. Well, that was until 2007, and then Kaminsky came out with a variation on that cache poisoning, which allowed the attacker to send crafted packets and just retry all the time. retry all the time. The TTL was not there anymore. By asking a very special question with randomness here, and then the thing that you actually wanted to poison, you could just keep on asking stuff. As soon as you asked randomcraft and the real name server gave an answer with a TTL, you tried another random string there. And you could just hammer servers and keep on asking and keep on asking and keep on asking and keep on asking. The TTL didn't save you anymore. You don't have to know the details about this. So, was that a problem? Well, this is 2007. At the moment Kaminsky found this attack, this possibility of attack. And what is strange, the DNSSEC protocol is over 25 years old at that time. And this is protocol vulnerability. This is not implementation vulnerability, this is protocol vulnerability. 25 years of DNS engineering and nobody thought of this. At the moment you see this as somebody who works with DNS protocol, you go, but this is trivial. Why didn't anybody think of this before? I remember I was in Redwood City at the time. This is the place where the IEC offices are. And I was meeting Paul Vixie, and he closed the door and he said, "You're not going to tell this to anybody." And then he took a marker, wrote this on the whiteboard, and I was jet-lagged, so I had to ask, "You have to explain." But any other engineer, like Robert here, would have known immediately what the problem was. This was scary. Something that you write on a whiteboard. If you write this down for a protocol engineer, they go, "Oh, yeah, that's trivial." It went unnoticed for 25 years. Makes me wonder if there's any other things under the hood where what we are afraid of. So was there a problem? Well, yeah, there was recognition. There was a vulnerability notice at the time, you know, when Kaminsky did his disclosure. And lots of people worked on fixing the vulnerability before it was disclosed. Kaminsky did the right thing. He contacted vendors. He contacted ISC. He contacted us. And Nelnet Labs, we were working on Unbound at that moment, which was not released at that point yet. You know, we had the opportunity to work with everybody. They contacted Microsoft. This was, you know, the general vendor population was contacted and tried to work on this. Well, you can say recognition, that's not sufficient. Well, there was exploit code too at the time. It's still there. This is part of a well-known hackers kit called Metasploit, which has all kinds of vulnerabilities. You can Google for it and you'll find it. It's actually a pretty impressive piece of software. It comes with all kinds of plugins, and if you want to do harm, you just download the appropriate plugin and you go and shoot and play. 2008, 07/23, Kaminsky disclosed his vulnerability in August. So the rumor circuit worked, and hackers got onto it. This is zero-day exploit. There was more stuff. This is Eugen Polyakov, who wrote program. And of course, free license. Everybody could have this. One of the things that the attack does is try to do random ports and sends queries, answers to those random ports in order to get there first. And what happens if a packet reaches a port on which there is no server listening, then an ICMP packet gets sent back. So if you look at the network and you see an increase of ICMP traffic, then that's a clear fingerprint of attack traffic. So what you saw, that around the time that the Metasploit package was released, a clear increase in DNS traffic and a clear increase in ICMP traffic, following the same sort of shape. This is clearly the fingerprint of an attack going on. So not only did we have people warning, not only did we have exploit, but we saw this stuff in the, on the networks as well. And there were some successful attacks, but not many. Now, why don't you hear a lot about successful DNS attacks? I think the reason is that what happens is that people don't notice that they've been attacked. They're just phished, so to speak. And if something happens, then the junior engineer on the ISP that works at the ISP doesn't have time to troubleshoot and go through logs files and think about, has something been done? No, you reset the cache and you start over. Flushing all the evidence and flushing everything, protecting your customers again, that's true. But the attack did happen. But nobody knew about it. So that's my theory why you hear so little about this. So there's a problem. But we have other defenses. If you lose one defense, you know, why bother? This is an aerial picture of a little town in the north of the Netherlands. It's called Boertangen. And it's got one of those typical defense works that you see all over Europe. This is the thing that you need to protect, and you've got several walls on which you can put cannons and so on and so forth. And the attacker needs to get over several barriers in order to be successful. This is beautiful engineering. This is civil engineering at its best, I believe. It's more civil engineering at its best, but this is one example. So you lost the DNS. We lost one of these barriers. How about the other defenses that we have? Anomaly detection, I talked about that. You know, if you see weird stuff going on in your network, you see the fingerprint of an attack, you can work with that. And we have TLS, transport layer security, SSL, certificates, PKIs, that kind of stuff. So who cares that we lost the DNS? There's all this other stuff that will protect us. That's at least the common reasoning. When I explained this to somebody in Europe, they said, well, but I encrypt all my mail. At which point I asked, who in the room does encrypt their mail to? And nobody raised their hands. Who does mail encryption here? Who does PGP on their mail or S-MIME? I saw one hand. So guys, you're not protected, huh? Maybe your server does a little bit of TLS magic, but besides, SSL, the current practices are sloppy. Yeah? Users get redirected, they connect to their bank, they go to www their bank, and they get redirected to other banks. And I'll give an example of that Tuesday in the keynote. User interfaces do padlocks and green glows and all kinds of stuff that I probably understand, but my mother doesn't. And we're not all network engineers. Well, we are. In this room, we are. And we might pay a little bit of attention. But the guy serving coffee outside doesn't. This is an example. This is an old example. It's not the same any longer. But when I registered for a RIPE meeting at some point, I got a pop-up window. And it says, pop-up killer, blah, blah, blah. You have to go to verified by Visa, MasterCard, go to your bank. So, well, I went to my bank. I clicked that window. Pop-up code secure. Pop-up code came up. This is the logo of my bank. It says MasterCard secure code. MasterCard secure code. Little padlock here. It says give your name and your CVS code and your expiration date, and you accept general conditions and so on and so forth. I saw this. I thought, I'm being phished. How many people would think I'm being phished? But, you know, a little bit of security. Who does actually, in this room, who does sometimes click on the padlock and look at the certificates? Who does? Room full of engineers, 5 people. So I looked at the certificate. It said postbank.arcot.com. Arcot? That's not the name of my bank. What the hell is Arcot? It's not even MasterCard. I don't know who these fellows are. They've got a valid, a valid certificate signed by a valid PTI, but who are these people? I don't know. At that point, I called my bank, and I got a first-line supporter on the line, and I explained the problem, and he said, I understand. And he actually gave me the feedback that showed me that he understood. And then I said, well, can you please escalate this to your superiors? And he said, no, I cannot. There is no procedure to escalate this. This gets fixed. This has, I wrote a couple of mails to the bank, and in the end, they're doing the right thing. But here in Argentina, they're not. Your main banks are not doing the right thing. It's scary. So how would I exploit this? Well, if I was an attacker and I would poison the DNS for the bank, this is insecure site, www.postbank, and I do a fake redirect to from postbank.webbanksecurity.com. Well, it has Postbank, which is the name of my bank. It got, oops, I got WebBank Security. Well, it's a trustful name, isn't it? It's got bank, it's got security. Actually, if you go to securebankservices.com, any name will do. Obtaining a domain name and a certificate is trivial for criminal organizations. It's also trivial for non-criminal organizations, but criminal organization will exploit it. As long as people are used to the fact that they get redirected from their site to something completely unrelated, forget SSL. The fact is that if I'm able to poison the DNS, and as long as banks use redirects to other sites, this is an exploit that is possible. Because if I attack the bank website and I put a redirect into my secured site, I'm in business. And users are used to this sort of redirection, and domain name looks trustworthy to them. Things get worse. If I am able to fake the DNS and actually do insert traffic into that, then I can put a fake website on and redirect to www.postbank over SSL. You would say, huh? SSL protect against that? Well, not if the attacker has a signed certificate. How would you obtain a signed certificate? Well, remember that your browser has a number of trusted authorities in it, configured in it, about 70. And there are about 1,500 there are 1,500 certificate registration authorities that are related to that. So as soon as I am able to get a signed certificate that lies under one of these 70 anchors, I'm in business. And how does SSL purchasing work? If you go to GeoTrust, then it says you get your certificate within 5 minutes. As part of GeoTrust ongoing commitment to prevent fraud, some orders are randomly flagged for additional security review. Usually such orders get processed within 24 hours, but may take longer than 24 hours. But in essence, you send in a request, and after that you will receive a mail. That mail will go to a well-known part of your domain, say root at domain or postmaster or web server. And once you've done that, you can complete it. This takes 5 minutes. The thing is, you have to be able to receive that mail. Remember that first picture when the DNS is used? Well, it's used for serving mail. So as soon as I can poison the DNS of one of these certificate vendors, I'm in business. I can get certificates all I want. Those are the domain validity certificates. Yeah? And to those guys, I would say, don't rely on the DNS for the security review. Don't get your context out of the WHOIS database, because the WHOIS database is DNS based. The attacker could divert the traffic to WHOIS and give fake answers. Don't send confirmation emails to typical addresses in the domain. The mail uses DNS. Don't try to see if a domain already has an SSL certificate installed. That uses the DNS. If you try to do this and the DNS is not secured, these are not good properties to test when you're handing out certificates. And yet people do it all the time. Now that is the high fruit, you know. Getting an SSL certificate is not easy, but it's done. It's done multiple times. You can just attack email. There's really money in it. You can eavesdrop on the email, modify text, or insert malicious content. And this is the picture, you know. If you manage to divert the lookup of a mail, you can send mail and send it on. And who of you actually, you know, how would you notice that this would happen? You have to look at your mail logs. You have to see that the recipient mail comes from an IP address or a mail server that you didn't expect it to come from. Nobody does that. There's no reason to look at your mail logs. The original mail has been received. So why would you? Why would you wade through gazillion spam messages in order to find something that has actually came through and worked? I would figure that if this is done, people would not notice. They would notice because of the result of their actions. Suppose that in this hotel there would be an important meeting about mergers of banks. And these bank managers would send around mails of the merger details and so on and so forth. They could eavesdrop on that conversation. I could make a lot of money on the stock exchange by doing that. There's money to be made. Yeah? There's extended validity certificates around there. And this domain validity validation, this is what I talked about, domain validation certificates. The difference is a green glow in your browser. But that assumes that you're doing browser traffic. If you're doing mail exchanges, telephone exchanges, service exchanges, whatever, it's not that green glow. The internet is more than a web browser. Let's see, I've been talking a long time, eh? This is only the introduction. Setting the tone. Is cache poisoning the only vulnerability? I focused a little bit on cache poisoning now. But if you look at the flow of data through the DNS, there are multiple places where you can have attacks. So applications talk to the recursive name server. If you are sitting between the recursive name server and the applications, you can do a lot of harm. Shared networks are an example. As soon as I can see queries going out here to the recursive name server, I can sit in between and I can give the answer. This is a very good place for doing attacks based on specific machines here. The cache poisoning attack that I just talked about took place on the path between the recursive name server and the authoritative service on the internet. But there's also server vulnerabilities and man-in-the-mills in the distribution part on the authoritative side. That's something I didn't talk about. If you manage to get into one of those servers and manage to change some data there, you can also do a lot of damage. If you manage to get in the middle of that conversation, you can do a lot of damage too. This is something that we don't think about. This is more or less a picture of the whole DNS infrastructure, where you have a provisioning site with registrars and registrants that do requests on the business side, and everything gets rearranged, put in a big database at the registry, and then is pushed to the DNS. This wiggly line is the division between provisioning and between the DNS. And when we talk about DNSSEC security, we talk about this part. Protecting this part. If you cannot protect this part, you're lost as well. If you maintain a DNS system, you have to protect the mechanisms by which you put something in the DNS. You have to protect the databases that serve that data and so on and so forth. Protecting your authoritative servers. Well, if you run DNS, make sure you harden the OS. Don't put any unnecessary stuff on it. Use SSH to connect to it. It's all, you know, the regular sysadmin hygiene. Harden your DNS secondary service provider. A lot of DNS is still friends. I run a secondary server for you if you run a secondary server for me. You trust your data with somebody else, make sure that they're secure as well, possibly through SLAs. Run up-to-date software. This is all, you know, this is not DNSSEC. This is just protecting yourself against harm if you don't do DNSSEC. This is for the guys who do the hands-on work, the installation. Recursive name servers. I'm going to skip this. And I'm going to not skip this, but I'm going to take a sip of water. Are there questions until now? Am I talking too fast? Am I talking too slow, maybe? Am I talking in riddles? So, what I try to explain is what the vulnerabilities are in the DNS. And as a wrap-up, there's this phenomena called cache poisoning. It's not the only type of attack. I've tried to explain some of the details of cache poisoning, probably not sufficient, and it's not needed for you to understand the details of cache poisoning. The fact is, it can happen. The DNS as a system is not secure. Not only that, DNS is human work. So whenever people deploy something, sometimes there are bugs, sometimes there are problems in the implementation. And all these little vulnerabilities can be exploited by people who mean harm. And if people who mean harm exploited the DNS, they got a foothold in services, in stuff we make money with. That was what I tried to say. One of the things you can do as a security mechanism, which basically provides you a security against, for this path, the communication between your authoritative servers is so-called host-to-host communication. Oh, that's the picture I was looking for. It's called TSIG. It's a mechanism that we usually don't call DNSSEC, but it's something that you want to keep in the back of your mind. If you don't use it, start using it now. It's very simple. You exchange keys with your secondary with your secondary servers, and it means that you have protection against the man-in-the-middle attacks here. Not going to explain the details about TSIG, I believe. Well, maybe a little bit. No, I'm going to skip that. But it's sufficient to say that it is server to server. You do configuration on the server level, and nothing gets added to the data. It's basically all configuration. And basically what you do is you configure a key at the master server and the slave server, that you all do in configuration. And then an AXFR gets signed and checked at the other side. So an AXFR is a request for a zone transfer. That request for a zone transfer is verified so that you know that it's from an authentic source. And then the response is signed with that key as well. It's checked at the other side so that you have authenticity and integrity check on the data. Authenticity means it comes from the right source. Integrity means it has not been tampered. There's no change in the data. And that's exactly what you want. You want to know that you talked to the right person and you got all the stuff back in a way that is expected. So if you want to deploy this, you generate a secret. You do that with a few commands. You communicate the secret to the other party, usually by phone or sending a secured email or some other. You configure the service and you test. And we're not going to go into the details, but one of the things that you have to take care of is that whenever you do security with DNS, TSIC or DNSSEC, you need time. Time is important because what you don't want is what we call a replay attack. Somebody who has recorded a conversation of a month ago and tries to replay that again. So there's a timing window of 5 minutes in which you have to be in sync. And that is something that you have to keep in your mind when you deploy this stuff. Make a note. If you do TSIC, make a note of date minus U. Because the guy at your site and the guy at the other side need to have the same time. With date minus U, you get a UTC time, so you don't have problems with time conversions and so on and so forth. And that needs to be in sync. It's the first thing you need to troubleshoot when TSICs go wrong. Date. I've been bitten by this several times. It's one of these things that you have to take into account. If you don't use NTP on your servers, start using NTP. Very important. NTP Network Time Protocol. I'm not going to go into the details of TSIC. This is only to give you a pointer of the existence and the advice to deploy this. If you do DNS, make sure you do TSIC between your servers. 6.0 I'm going to skip. One cool application of TSIG is dynamic updates. Dynamic updates are also protected using the TSIG protocol. And one of the nice things is, for instance, that on a MacBox you can download a little piece of software, dynamic DNS thing, Bonjour tools, and you can give your laptop a name. And whenever you connect it on a network, your name server is updated, so your laptop can always go with the same domain name. It's a very cool application. Also, there's also stuff on Linux for that. And it's fun. Oh, my laptop is not known by the name of AGSecretWorkingGroup.org any longer, but that is a detail. I'm going to not talk about Unbound because I want to stay a little bit vendor neutral today. So this was the introduction of basically the overview of DNS and why you would, want to protect it. The next thing we're going to discuss is DNSSEC and its mechanisms. Before that, I don't know. Is there coffee already, or okay? You make a check, yeah, because otherwise this would be a good time for a coffee break. Questions so far? Feel free to walk up and. George Michelson, I didn't know about clocks and time synchronization, so he's very happy he learned something in the introduction. And it's always a pleasure to teach something to George because I've learned a lot from George myself over time. At 11, okay. Then we'll just start with the other material. Okay. So I'm going to skip the Unbound block. This is the third slide set. And we're going to go into much more technical detail now. Oh joy, more technical detail. Details of DNSSEC. What we're going to talk about are the mechanisms of DNSSEC. How does it work? How does DNSSEC protect you? What are the new resource records that are introduced? So we're actually going to look at a little bit of zone content. And, we're going to talk about setting up a secure zone. And we're going to talk about how the security is delegated. So I'm going to go in technical detail now. Let's see. This part you've seen. The vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities can be in a provisioning system. We're not going to talk about those in DNSSEC. But they are important. If you deploy DNSSEC, you have to think about the provisioning system and the security thereof. And the good thing is you will, actually. Because once you start to think about security, you look at more aspects of the whole system. Something that we noticed when we did the deployment at the RIPE NCC, we started to look at, oh, that's very good. When we started to look at deploying DNSSEC, we actually found problems with the security vulnerabilities in the provisioning system. Specifically, when we started looking at time and replay attacks, we noticed that there was a replay attack vector in the registration system. But what we're going to talk about here is the data flow through the DNS, the vulnerable points, and what the DNS, how DNSSEC protects you. So, DNSSEC provides all these things end to end. And what do I mean end to end? It means that security is applied at this boundary condition. Before things leave the provisioning system and enter the DNS system, security is applied. That security is validated either here or ideally here in the application. I'm going to return to that, why this is important, getting this done on the applications. But getting this secured, getting recursive name server secured is already a very, very important step. Because once you get security of the recursive name server and you know that all the information that's in here is valid, you already made a very big step. Of course, there is shared networks and so on and so forth, but this is already a very big step. If you're able to secure everything between provisioning and the authority, you've done a lot. You provide a high level of security and you protect against all these interactions on which DNS is based. I already talked about TSIC and the hop-to-hop security, basically the mechanisms that secure server-to-server interactions, where you actually know which parties you are talking. So what kind of security does DNSSEC provide? It provides message authentication and integrity mechanisms by means of cryptographic signatures. Authentication means that you know where the message came from. You know who provided the signature. And integrity verification means that you can check that there's no modifications being made between signing and validation. There's nobody who changed an address. There's nobody who changed the location of a mail server. There's nobody who tampered with this thing. Other things that usually come in the security sort of language, you have integrity verification and authenticity. Often you also have authorization and confidentiality. in the list of security properties that are supplied by generic security mechanisms? Well, DNSSEC does not provide authorization mechanisms. It's not a method to say that person can use the DNS and that person cannot use the DNS. That's authorization. Everybody is authorized, so to speak, to use the DNS. And there's nothing in DNSSEC that provides mechanisms to do that. It also does not provide confidentiality. If a message that is sent by DNS or through the DNS is read by somebody on the middle doing a wiretap or something, they can still look in the packet. There's no secret. Everybody will know what kind of laptop or what kind of lookup has been done. But there's no privacy. Yeah? So there's no increased privacy. The privacy properties and confidentiality properties of the DNS remain as they are. DNSSEC doesn't add anything there. It also does not provide protection against DDoS, distributed denial of services. In fact, the story is that DNSSEC increases the risks somewhat. And the risks of DDoS are not if you deploy, well, also if you deploy it yourself, because you have to do calculations. You have to do a little bit more work when you do DNSSEC than you have to do without, and that usually is something by which can be used for DDoS. Another thing is that the packets become bigger. So specific attacks that use an amplification are more effective. I'm not going to talk about it much more, but fairness in advertising, it does not protect you against it. The metaphor that I usually use is that of a transparent envelope. Suppose I ask a question and I get an answer back. That answer is wrapped in a transparent envelope and a seal is put on top of that. So if I receive the message, there's no confidentiality because I can actually see through the envelope and see what's inside there. I can read the message. There's no confidentiality. But I can also check this envelope and I see it's not been ripped, it's not been tempered, it's not torn. The seal is intact. So it provides integrity. It also provides authentication. I know who put the seal on there. It's my ring. I pressed my ring in the seal. And since I'm the only one with this ring, you can be sure that this envelope, this message was put in the envelope and closed by me. That's what DNSSEC essentially does. It puts stuff in envelopes, puts a seal on it. Yeah? The envelope is sealed when the data is put in the DNS. You don't have confidentiality. The seal protects the delivery process. And there's no assertion about the message. That's a very important part. The signature itself does not say the translation from www.secret.workinggroup.org to the address is actually correct. It only says that some registry has put this thing in an envelope and pressed its ring on it. Now, we already trust our registries to do a good job. So that property doesn't change. The seal that a notary would put on a formal document is an assertion about a message. This is not. There's a slight difference here, but it's an important difference. So what happens is that, in essence, data is put in this envelope before it's put in the DNS system. So somewhere between this system here, and it's validated either on the end system or on the recursive name server. The assertion about the correctness of this system is not made, but we already trust this system because we do business with it on a daily basis and on high volumes. trust and confidence. I find this hard to explain, but DNSSEC enables the confidence in the mechanics of the DNS, and the trust that you have in the DNS is also based on the practices, the business practices around it. DNSSEC only gives the confidence in the transport and all the mechanical bits, and not in the registrar procedures. We already trust these guys, right? But when they do DNSSEC, we might expect them to have a clear and better look at the registry and registrar procedures. So what is the mechanism used? Well, public key cryptography, by which we put signatures over DNS data. And by comparing the signatures with the public keys that we have, we can verify that integrity and authenticity of the data. Public key cryptography. I found it a bit difficult. Who knows about public key cryptography here? Oh, a few people. People are. Is this really true? Okay. Ooh. I find explaining public key cryptography, I find a difficult task, but let me try it. It's based on mathematical properties. Essentially, you generate two very special numbers, usually combinations of primes and so on and so forth. And you say one of these big numbers is a private key, and the other big number is a public key. And one of those numbers, that private key, you can use for encryption, and the other number, the public key, you can use for decryption using a very specific algorithm. The algorithm is known, the private key is known, and if you have the public key, you can decrypt messages that are made with the private key, and you are also the only one that can decrypt that message. There's nobody else that can decrypt that message. If you know who has the private key, and you can decrypt a message made by that private key, you also know that that message was signed, put in the envelope, by the guy who has the private key. So, signing and signatures, how does this work? Well, let's see if we can explain it through an animation, because I love animations. Keynote animations are so cool. We've got a message and a private key. The message is something that we want to send. The private key is one of these big numbers. Now, we apply an algorithm that encrypts that message with the private key. So what comes out is an encrypted text. That encrypted text, if you take that with the public key, you can decrypt it and get the message out. Yeah? That decryption, as I said, can only be done with the magic key. And if you can do that description, you can assert that the encryption has been done with the private key. If you cannot make that assertion, the system is broken. How do you use that for signatures? Well, you take your message, and what you do, because it's a very long message and you want to have a very short signature, is that you use a hashing algorithm by which you create a digest. A hashing algorithm is a one-way function. You put something in and something short comes out. And that something short is very hard to translate back to the original message, but that's a very short little thing. That message digest you encrypt, and that becomes a signature. Now, what you do then is you send a message, which is still in plain text. You send a message to another party. And you also send the signature to the other party. Now, what the other party does is they know this message digest algorithm, so they apply it. They've got the message, and they calculate the same digest at the other end. Now they get the public key and they decrypt the signature, which means that they actually get a decrypted message digest. And then they check if the thing they calculated here is the same as the decrypted message digest here. If that is correct, then the signature is correct. And you know that this message has not been changed in its way between this guy and this guy. You know that the signature has been applied with somebody having the private key, so you also know the source. Integrity by a signature, authenticity by the signature because you know who has the private key. So the components that you have here are the encryption algorithm that you need to know and the message digest mechanism that you need to know. You have to keep those two things in the back of your mind. Message digest algorithm, short, I will refer to as a hashing algorithm. If you hear hashing algorithm, that's the thing I'm referring to. We're going to get deeper into the details now. Now, in order to check authenticity, you really need to know where the public key came from. It's very important not to get a public key from somebody who says, this is the public key of the chairman of Google. No, the chairman of Google should actually make that assertion himself, or somebody else you trust should make that assertion. You should not blindly accept public keys from anybody. Because if you validate against the wrong public key, you know, then you have a problem. You don't know the authenticity. That is a scalability issue. If you want to have a public key from somebody and you don't know that person in the first hand, you need a referral mechanism in order to make sure you can follow the source back. No. You can do that using the DNS. Once you trust one party, you can build a chain of trust, as we call it, a series of steps in order to get to the entity you need. Yeah? Same in your web browser. We trust 70, or the vendors that supply us a web browser trust 70 certificate authorities. Those 70 certificate authorities will try to validate the people who request a certificate. They do a lousy job at it, but this is what we trust. In the DNS you can do exactly the same. And if everything goes well, you have good deployment of DNSSEC, you only need one key to trust. That's the root key. And I think this is a good time, 5 to 11. There's no coffee just yet, but it's a good time to break. When we return, I will show you the details, the resource records that are involved with DNSSEC. The idea is that if you go home and you deploy DNSSEC, you actually have seen all these things pass by. There will not be an oral exam at the end of the day asking you what the resource records are, what their meaning is. But the idea is that when you go home and you have to do troubleshooting and you want to do DNSSEC setup yourself, you know what to look for, what to do, how to do it in practice. This is theory, this is setting context. Turning on validation, for instance, is a very simple thing. It is only one command in your name server, one configuration option, a few lines of text that you can copy and paste from everywhere. But once you turn on DNSSEC validation, you also want to be able to troubleshoot, and you want to understand what happens. And that's why I give that material. Yeah? Any questions so far? Does everybody understand public key cryptography now? Let's head back a 11:15. Yeah? That's 20 minutes. Thank you.